Hey guys, welcome back to more malicious compliance stories. In this video, my boss told me that I was overpaid and easily replaceable, so he cut my salary by 20% and demanded I work unpaid overtime to prove my loyalty. I decided to call his bluff and quit on the spot. 3 months later, he was desperately calling me, begging me to come back to save the company. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled r/malicious-compliance, boss fired me because I am paid too much, company loses $2 million. So this whole mess started about 2 years ago at the manufacturing company where I'd been working for over a decade. Let me set the scene first. I worked at a pretty large manufacturing operation. We made specialized industrial components for the automotive and aerospace industries. The company employed hundreds of people across 3 facilities, but I worked at the main plant. I started there right after college as a junior production coordinator and worked my way up over 12 years to become the operations supervisor for our main production floor. This was not just some fancy title. I was responsible for coordinating between 6 different production teams, managing our relationships with over 30 suppliers, overseeing quality control protocols, and basically making sure our daily output of about 15,000 components met all specifications and delivery deadlines. The job paid well. I was making about 85K a year, which was solid for our area and definitely above what the regular production workers made, but completely reasonable for someone with my responsibilities and experience. I had a team of 4 junior coordinators reporting to me, and I worked closely with the plant manager, quality assurance director, and procurement department. Everything was running smoothly under our old plant manager. The guy had been there for 20+ years, understood the business inside and out, and generally let people do their jobs without micromanaging. Our plant consistently met production targets, we had great relationships with suppliers, and customer complaints were minimal. But then he decided to retire, and corporate hired a new plant manager from outside the company. This guy came from a completely different industry, consumer electronics manufacturing, and apparently had some big ideas about modernizing our operations. The plant manager called an all-hands meeting. During his second week, he stood up there in his expensive suit and talked about implementing lean manufacturing principles and optimizing our human capital allocation. The way he talked, you would think he discovered some revolutionary new way to run a factory. "I've been reviewing our operational structure," he announced, "and I've identified several inefficiencies in our current system. We have too many layers of middle management, too much variation in compensation for similar roles, and frankly, too much tolerance for legacy thinking." That should have been my first warning sign. About a month into his tenure, he started scheduling one-on-one meetings with all the supervisors and coordinators. When my turn came, I figured it was just a standard getting to know the team kind of thing, but I was wrong. He had spreadsheets, lots of spreadsheets. "I've been analyzing our payroll structure," he said, sliding a printout across his desk towards me, "and I have some concerns about compensation equity across similar positions." I looked at the sheet. It showed my salary compared to the other supervisors and coordinators in the plant. Yeah, I was paid more than most of them, but I also had more responsibilities and experience. "I can see why this might look uneven," I said, "but if you look at the scope of responsibilities, I think you would see that my role is significantly different from—" He cut me off. "That is exactly the kind of thinking I'm trying to change here. At the end of the day, you're all supervisors. You should all be compensated equally." I blinked. "But we don't all do the same job." "I coordinate 6 production teams, manage supplier relationships, and oversee quality protocols. And other supervisors manage their own teams and responsibilities," he interrupted again. "The point is, we need pay equity across equivalent positions." This is where things got really interesting. He pulled out another spreadsheet showing his proposed restructured compensation plan. Under his system, all supervisors would be paid the same base amount, about 20% less than what I was currently making. "You cannot be serious," I said. "I'm completely serious. This is about fairness and eliminating legacy inequities." I asked him if this pay cut would come with a reduction in my responsibilities, since he seemed to think that all supervisor roles were equivalent anyway. "No, your responsibilities would remain the same. We still need someone to handle supplier coordination and quality oversight, but the compensation needs to be equitable." "So let me get this straight," I said. "You want me to take a 20% pay cut while keeping all my current responsibilities because other supervisors with different, less complex roles should be paid the same as me?" "I want you to be a team player," he replied. "I want you to show that you're committed to the success of this organization, not just your own personal benefit." And then came the kicker. "In fact," he continued, "I think this is a great opportunity for you to demonstrate leadership. I would like you to start putting in some extra hours to help train the other supervisors on some of your processes. Evenings, weekends where necessary. No additional compensation, of course, since we are trying to control costs, but it would really show your dedication to the team." I just stared at him. "You want me to take a pay cut, keep all my responsibilities and work extra hours for free? I want you to be a part of the solution instead of part of the problem." The conversation went downhill from there. I tried explaining that my higher pay reflected my additional responsibilities and the value I brought to the organization. I mentioned that I'd been instrumental in implementing our current quality control systems, that I had saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years by catching supplier issues before they became bigger problems, and that I had trained most of the current production staff, but none of it mattered to him. "Look," he finally said, "here's the situation. We're implementing this new compensation structure across the board. You can either get on board with the program or you can find somewhere else to work. Those are your options." And if I chose option 2? I couldn't believe he would actually dare to fire me, even if it was put in polite words. "Then we will find someone who's more aligned with our vision and values." I went home that night and talked it over with my spouse. We ran the numbers. A 20% pay cut would hurt, but we could probably manage it. The real issue was the principle of the thing. I had earned my salary through years of hard work and proven results. Taking a cut while keeping all my responsibilities felt like getting punished for being good at my job. But the extra unpaid work was the deal breaker here. That was not about equity, that was about getting something for nothing. The next morning I went back to his office. "I thought about your offer," I said. "Good, I'm glad that you're seeing reason. Actually, I think you're right about one thing. If you believe that all supervisors are equivalent and that my experience and contributions don't warrant additional compensation, then you probably don't need me specifically in this role." His expression changed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I will save you the trouble of finding someone more aligned with your vision. I will just clean out my desk and be gone by the end of the week. I'm okay with you firing me." "Now hold on," he said, leaning forward. "Let's not make any hasty decisions here." "It is not hasty. You've made it very clear that you don't value what I bring to this position. If that's the case, then you'll be fine without me." "But who's gonna handle the supplier coordination, the quality oversight?" "I'm sure you can find someone to do it for the salary you want to pay. After all, you said it yourself. We are all just supervisors." He tried to backtrack, talking about maybe phasing in the changes over time or finding some middle ground, but I had made up my mind. If he wanted to treat me like I was easily replaceable, then I would let him prove it. I spent my last week trying to brief the other supervisors on critical processes, but there was so much institutional knowledge built up over 12 years that there was just no way to transfer it all in a few days. I did my best to cover the most important stuff, like which suppliers need special handling, which quality checks were critical, which processes had unwritten quirks that could cause problems. And the other supervisors were shocked when word got around that I was leaving. Several of them went to the plant manager to argue that cutting my pay was a mistake, but he shut them down. One of my junior coordinators actually asked if she could apply for my position at the reduced salary, and he told her that they were looking at external candidates who would not have legacy expectations about compensation. So my last day was a Friday. The new plant manager did not even bother to say goodbye to me. The following Monday, I got my first text from one of my former junior coordinators. Apparently, there was confusion about a shipment from one of our key suppliers. The parts did not meet our usual specifications, but no one was sure if they were acceptable or if they needed to be rejected. I did not respond. It was not my problem anymore, and Tuesday brought even more texts, a quality issue with a batch of components heading to one of our biggest automotive clients. Someone needed to know the protocol for handling the situation and whether we needed to notify the customer proactively or just document the deviation. Again, I did not respond, and by Thursday, I was getting calls from the plant manager himself. "We need some clarification on a few processes," he said when I picked up. "Just quick questions that would really help us out." "I'm not employed there anymore," I said. I know, but you have all this knowledge and it would just take a few minutes of your time." "Sorry boss, I was effectively fired. I don't think I'm in a position to help you anymore." He sputtered about how unreasonable that was, and I hung up. The problems started snowballing pretty quickly after that. Within some time, they had a major quality issue with a shipment to their largest aerospace client too. Without someone who understood the specific requirements for that customer, they would send parts that did not meet their strict specifications. The client rejected the entire shipment, about $150,000 worth of components, and demanded an explanation. One of my former coworkers filled me in on what was happening. The new plant manager was working 12-hour days, trying to put out fires, but he didn't understand the nuances of their various customer relationships or supplier agreements. Then they lost a major supplier. This was a vendor that provided about 30% of their raw materials, but they had very specific ordering procedures and delivery requirements. Without someone who understood their systems, the plant had placed several incorrect orders and missed critical delivery windows. The supplier, frustrated with the repeated problems, terminated their contract. By the end of the first month, I heard through the grapevine that they were having serious production delays. They had missed delivery commitments to 3 major clients, and 2 of them were threatening to find alternative suppliers. The new plant manager had hired someone from outside to fill my old role, but the guy quit after just 2 weeks. Apparently, he had been overwhelmed by the complexity of coordinating between all the different departments, suppliers, and quality requirements without proper training or documentation. About 6 weeks after I left, I got a call from our regional HR director. "We would like to discuss bringing you back," she said. "There seems to have been some miscommunication about your departure." "What kind of miscommunication are you talking about?" "Well, we understand that there may have been some disagreement about compensation, but we would like to work something out." I asked her what exactly they were proposing. "We could restore your original salary and responsibilities," she said. "We recognize that your role was perhaps more complex than initially understood." "That is not gonna work," I said. "What do you mean? What would it take?" "The problem is not just the money," I explained. "The problem is the management philosophy that led to this situation in the first place. You hired a plant manager who fundamentally doesn't understand this business or value experienced employees. Until that changes, these problems are gonna continue. We cannot just fire him because of one personal disagreement. This is not just about one disagreement. This is about the results. How much money has the plant lost since I left?" There was a long pause. That is not really relevant to this conversation." "It is completely relevant. You have a plant manager who has driven away experienced employees, damaged supplier relationships, lost major clients, and created quality issues. At some point you have to ask whether his approach is working." The conversation ended with her saying that they would consider my feedback and get back to me. 2 weeks later, the plant manager himself called me. He sounded exhausted. "Look, I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot," he said. "How so?" "Maybe I was too aggressive about implementing changes. Maybe I should have moved more slowly." I didn't say anything. "The point is, we need your expertise back. Things have been challenging since you left." "Well, I heard you lost the contract with your biggest client." "That was a temporary setback. We are working on repairing that relationship." Well, actually, I'd heard from my former coworkers that they had lost 3 major clients by this point, and the plant was running at about 60% capacity because they couldn't get reliable supplies of raw materials. And guys, for some reason at this point I was thinking of the game Anno 1404 or the Anno series in general, when a plant is just running at low capacity because it's not getting the materials it needs. Have any of you played that game? One of my favorite game series of all time, that's for sure. By the way, if you have watched until here and enjoy malicious compliance stories, please don't forget to like the video and post a comment because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. Anyway, what exactly are you offering? I asked. Your old position, your old salary, full authority over operations coordination. That is not enough. Although I was enjoying him begging me to come back, I do admit that. What do you mean? What more do you want? I want a formal apology from you in writing, acknowledging that your assessment of my value to the organization was incorrect. That is pretty unreasonable. Is it? You told me I was not worth my salary. You said any supervisor could do my job. You said I needed to take a pay cut and work extra hours for free to prove my loyalty. And now you're calling me, begging to come back because the place is falling apart without me. It is not falling apart. How much money has the plant lost since I left? Silence. How many major clients have you lost? More silence. How many suppliers have terminated their relationships with you? Look, there have been some challenges. Answer the question. How much money has this plant lost because you decided I was overpaid and replaceable? Finally, he said, we are looking at losses of about 2.3 million. $2.3 million? It is not all directly related to your departure. Of course it is. You lost clients because of quality issues that I would have caught. You lost suppliers because no one understood their requirements. You've had production delays because no one else knew the processes I had developed over 12 years. I let that sink in for him for a moment. So here's what's gonna happen. I continued. I will consider coming back, but not to my old position. What do you mean? I want your job. My what? You have proven that you don't understand this business, you don't value experienced employees, and you cannot manage the relationships that keep this plant running. I want your position as plant manager. That is absolutely ridiculous. I have an MBA. I have 15 years of management experience. And how has that worked out? You've lost more money in 2 months than I made in salary over 3 years. You cannot just. The company would never. And then you don't get me back. It's really that simple. He hung up on me. 3 days later, I got a call from the regional VP, the plant manager's boss. I understand you've been in discussion about returning to work for us, he said. I've been listening to offers, yes. I also understand you've made some unusual demands. Well, I've made one demand. I want to be in a position where I can actually fix the problems that have been created, rather than just being a band-aid solution under the same management that caused them. We talked for about an hour. I laid out exactly what had happened, not just my departure, but the systematic problems that had led to it. The VP was clearly aware of the financial losses and operational issues, even if he had not understood their root causes. Walk me through what you think went wrong, he said. So I explained how the plant manager had come in with preconceived notions about manufacturing operations based on his experience in a completely different industry. How he had dismissed the value of institutional knowledge and employee expertise, how his equity initiative was really just cost-cutting disguised as fairness. The fundamental problem, I told him, is that he doesn't understand the complexity of this business. He thinks manufacturing is just about moving parts from point A to point B, but it's really about relationships with suppliers, with customers, with the people who actually do the work. And you think you can fix these problems? I know I can, because most of them didn't exist before he created them. The supplier relationships can be rebuilt, the customer confidence can be restored, and the operational knowledge can be recovered, but it's gonna take someone who understands the business and has the authority to make the necessary changes. The plant manager position is a big jump from operations supervisor. You're right, under normal circumstances it would be. But these are not normal circumstances. You've got a plant here that's hemorrhaging money, losing clients and struggling with basic operational issues. You need someone who can step in and start fixing problems immediately, not someone who's gonna need 6 months to learn the business. He asked me to put together a detailed plan for how I would address each of the major issues facing the plant. I spent the next week creating a comprehensive proposal that covered supplier relationship recovery, customer confidence rebuilding, quality system restoration, and staff retraining. 2 weeks later, he called me back. The executive team has been reviewing the situation at the plant, he said. We've decided to make some management changes. What kind of changes? We're going to need a new plant manager, someone with deep operational knowledge and strong relationships in the industry. And we would like to offer you the position. The salary was about 40% more than I'd been making as operations supervisor, and more importantly, I would have the authority to actually fix the problems instead of just working around them. What happens to the current plant manager? He is being reassigned to a different role within the company. I accepted the offer. My first day back was surreal. The same people who had watched me clean out my desk 3 months earlier were now calling me their new boss. The former plant manager had already been moved out, apparently to some corporate planning role where he wouldn't do any operational damage, and the problems were even worse than I'd expected. They had lost 5 major clients, their supplier base had shrunk by about 40%, and plant efficiency was down to roughly 50% of normal levels. The quality issues had become so severe that they were having to inspect and rework almost everything before it could ship, but the good news was that most of these problems were fixable. I started with the suppliers. I spent my first week making phone calls and setting up meetings with the vendors who had stopped working with us. In most cases, they were willing to resume business relationships once they had confidence that someone who understood their requirements was back in charge. However, customer relationships took longer to rebuild, but most of our former clients were willing to give us another chance once we could demonstrate consistent quality and on-time delivery again. The biggest challenge was rebuilding the operational knowledge base that had been lost. I had to retrain staff on processes that had been documented poorly or not at all, and re-establish quality protocols that had been abandoned or simplified. It took about 8 months to get the plant back to full operational efficiency, but we eventually not only recovered our lost business, but actually expanded beyond where we had been before I left. The best part? About a year later, I heard that the former plant manager had been fired from his corporate role after he tried to implement similar optimization initiatives in other facilities with predictable results. These days, the plant is running better than it ever has before. We've got strong supplier relationships, satisfied customers, and a staff that actually feels valued for their contributions. And yes, we pay people based on their actual responsibilities and the value they bring to the organization. The moral of the story: if you're gonna tell someone they are easily replaceable, you better be ready to replace them, and if you can't, don't be surprised when they end up replacing you instead. And yeah guys, once again, let me know in the comments if you enjoyed these malicious compliance stories, because I certainly do. Either way, the next one is another malicious compliance story, and it is titled "Automated My Useless Boss Out of Her Job." So this happened a few years ago. I was a data and reporting analyst and did all the ad hoc reports for the company. My boss, we will call her Carrie, was a useless one. She was one of these people that was always late, left early, and took days off at short notice. The only thing of value that she did was all the regular reports, sales, revenue, etc. We suspected she got away with it because she was having an affair with her boss. We will call him Stuart. Our CEO was a fairly decent bloke. He would look for ways to cut costs and would pay regular bonuses for the best cost-saving initiatives. Carrie was very keen to submit ideas, encouraged us all to automate our tasks so she could try and take the credit for the savings. And on one of her Skype days, which coincidentally Stuart was sick as well as the CEO was desperate for the sales report, my boss does. I said I would give it a look and see if I could get it done. Normally she would spend 2 to 3 days doing it each week, but the CEO wanted it that afternoon. A quick inspection of the data showed it would quite easily be automated, so I knocked up the necessary script and got it over to the CEO, who was super impressed that not only had I got it done in a couple hours, but also that it could be updated whenever he needed. He asked if I could also look at the revenue, churn, and a couple of other reports. Over that afternoon, I automated everything my boss did. Both Carrie and Stuart were back in the next day, but were immediately summoned to the CEO's office before being suspended and sent home. Turns out the CEO knew that they were having an affair, and all the times they were sick or late or had to leave early was so they could sneak off and have intercourse together. He had not done anything about it because of how important these reports were. Now they were automated, he was able to get them suspended and later fired for gross misconduct for all the time they had taken off work. And by the way, I also got a nice bonus out of it. And now let's read another funny story from r/MaliciousCompliance, and this one is titled "My Boss Wanted Me to Dress for Him." So this was years ago, but it still makes me giggle. When I was 19, I got my first real office job. We were not customer facing, so everyone dressed real casually: jeans, tennis shoes, t-shirts. One day, my boss called me in to talk to me about dress code. He said he would like his assistant to wear business attire like they do at the corporate office. I asked what that is, and he said like little dresses with jackets. I felt icky, but I didn't fully understand why for years. That night, my boyfriend, who is now my husband, took me to the store and I bought 5 outfits that exactly matched my boss's attire. Old man jeans, cotton button-up shirts, and loafers. That is what I wore until I left the company. He could not say a damn thing, and he never talked to me about dress code again. I now realize that I ruined his little fantasy, and it makes me proud of my young self. And yeah guys, thank you so much for watching. By the way, if you see a little hype button at the bottom of the video, if you could click that, that would be absolutely amazing because it helps my channel in the algorithm. Thank you so much.